Chapter 1: The Sound of Chaos. Welcome to Synapse Daily. Imagine a fighter cockpit in 1976. The air is thick with tension. The twin engines scream at deafening levels. Vibration rattles every single bone. G-forces crush the pilot's heavy chest. His vision begins to blur slightly. His hands grip the flight stick. He must change the radio channel. But his fingers are locked tight. He cannot reach the dashboard buttons. This was a deadly design flaw. Speed was the ultimate killer. Human reaction time was too slow. Every second felt like an hour. The pilot's heart beats very fast. Adrenaline floods his entire system. He needs a third hand. He needs a digital co-pilot. But computers were huge back then. They filled entire air-conditioned rooms. How could they fit inside a jet? How could they hear a whisper? The cockpit was a chaotic storm. Wind whistled through the glass canopy. Metal groaned under extreme pressure. Communication was nearly impossible then. Static filled the pilot's headset. He shouted into the dark void. No one answered his desperate call. The machine remained cold and silent. This was the era of manual labor. Pilots were mere slaves to switches. One mistake meant a fiery crash. One slip led to total disaster. We call this the sound of chaos. It was a symphony of destruction. Something had to change very soon. A new vision was desperately needed. The era of voice was coming. But the world was not ready. Could a machine truly understand fear? Could silicon process a dying breath? This mystery started in the clouds. It ended in a secret lab. Welcome to the breakthrough of 1976. Chapter 2: The DARPA Vision. The year was 1971. The Cold War was very cold. Information was the most precious gold. DARPA looked toward the distant future. They launched a highly secret mission. They called it Speech Understanding Research. The acronym was simply SUR. It sounded like a quiet whisper. But the goals were incredibly loud. They wanted a revolution in silicon. 5 years was the strict deadline. They gathered the brightest American minds. Carnegie Mellon University joined the race. Bolt, Beranek and Newman were there. Experts studied the human vocal cord. They analyzed the physics of sound. The goal was 1,000 words. This seemed like pure magic then. Most computers only understood binary code. Zeros and ones ruled the world. Human language is messy and fluid. We use slang and strange tones. We speak with heavy regional accents. DARPA wanted to bridge this gap. They funded the project with millions. Taxpayer dollars fueled the digital fire. They dreamed of an invisible interface. No more keyboards or heavy buttons. Just the power of the word. Imagine a tank that listens. Imagine a submarine that obeys. This was the ultimate military dream. Speed of thought became the goal. Command and control needed an upgrade. The project was a massive gamble. Many experts said it would fail. They called it a waste of time. But DARPA never looked back once. They pushed the limits of physics. They built the foundation of AI. The vision was clear and bold. Man and machine would finally talk. The silence was about to end. Chapter 3: Noise versus Signal. A jet engine is pure noise. It produces a wall of sound. Think about a rock concert. Now multiply that by 10. This was the researchers' nightmare. They had to find the signal. The signal is the human voice. Everything else is just dead weight. How do you isolate a word? In 1976, microphones were quite primitive. They captured every single stray vibration. The data looked like jagged mountains. Scientists stared at green radar screens. They saw static and random interference. They needed a powerful digital filter. They needed to ignore the engine. They needed to ignore the wind. This is called the signal-to-noise ratio. If the noise wins, people die. If the signal wins, we fly. Researchers recorded pilots in heavy stress. They used massive magnetic tape reels. They played the sounds on loops. The lab smelled like ozone and coffee. They worked through the dark nights. They developed complex mathematical formulas. They used the fast Fourier transform. This turned sound into visual maps. They looked for the hidden patterns. Every vowel has a specific shape. Every consonant has a sharp edge. The computer had to see them. It had to ignore the roar. It was like finding a needle. But the needle was made of air. The haystack was a jet engine. This was the hardest technical wall. Without this, voice tech was dead. They fought against the laws of physics. They wrestled with raw acoustic energy. Science was winning the silent war. The signal was finally getting louder. Chapter 4: The Harpy System. Carnegie Mellon brought a secret weapon. They called their masterpiece Harpy. It was a beast of logic. Harpy changed the entire game forever. It used a unique graph strategy. Think of a giant spider web. Each node was a specific sound. Each path was a possible word. Harpy didn't guess the whole word. It searched for the best path. It used beam search technology. This saved precious computing power. It ignored paths that made no sense. If a pilot said fuel, status followed. The system predicted the next sound. This was a massive logical leap. Harpy recognized 1,011 distinct words. It was the world champion of 1976. The accuracy was over 90%. This shocked the entire global community. It was faster than previous systems. It ran on a PDP-10 computer. This machine was the size of a fridge. But it thought like a man. Harpy understood simple English grammar. It didn't just hear raw noise. It processed the meaning of sentences. This is called semantic processing. It was the ancestor of modern GPT. It paved the way for everything. The system was rigorous and fast. It was the crown jewel of DARPA. Engineers cheered when it worked. The ghost in the machine lived. It had a digital vocabulary. It had a silicon nervous system. Harpy proved that voice was possible. The cockpit would never be silent. The future was officially born here. Chapter 5: Stress and the Human Voice. A pilot's voice is a biological mirror. Fear changes the vibration of vocal cords. Adrenaline makes the muscles very tight. This shift is called the Lombard Effect. Your voice rises in a noisy room. But in a dogfight, it screams. Researchers in 1976 studied this strange phenomenon. They needed to map human terror. Stress makes the pitch go very high. It ruins the computer's digital model. The machine expects a calm person. But the pilot is fighting for life. His breathing is heavy and very fast. Each gasp interrupts the flow of speech. DARPA engineers recorded these intense moments. They used flight simulators for raw data. They shook the pilots in mechanical chairs. They blasted white noise into their ears. The goal was a universal sound profile. Could a computer recognize a choking man? Could silicon understand a panicked command? This was the hardest part of SUR. Humans are not robots under heavy fire. Our biology is messy and quite loud. The computer had to learn human limits. It had to filter out the fear. It had to find the core intent. Scientists mapped thousands of different vocal shifts. They built a library of stressed sounds. They created a stress-tolerant acoustic model. This was a massive win for science. It made the system much more reliable. The pilot's fear was now data. The machine was ready for battle. It listened through the heavy breathing. It understood the true human spirit. Chapter 6: The Silicon Brains. Computers in 1976 were huge monsters. They looked like steel kitchen cabinets. They hummed with a constant electric heat. These were the brains behind the voice. The PDP-10 was the main workhorse. It was powerful for that specific time. But it had very little modern memory. Every single kilobyte was a digital battlefield. Engineers had to write very tight code. There was no room for any waste. They used assembly language for pure speed. This is the lowest level of programming. It talks directly to the cold silicon. Modern chips are millions of times faster. Yet, these old brains did the impossible. They process sound in nearly real time. This required incredible mathematical shortcuts then. They used custom circuits for sound waves. These boards filtered out the engine roar. The hardware was heavy and very expensive. It cost millions of dollars to build. But it was the edge of tomorrow. DARPA pushed the limits of every transistor. They created new ways to store data. They invented faster paths for digital signals. This was the birth of neural logic. It wasn't just a simple calculator anymore. It was a machine that could listen. The silicon began to mimic the ear. It turned air into binary logic gates. This was the frontier of human thought. The machines were finally waking up. They were ready to hear the world. Chapter 7: Semantic Constraints. Harpy was smart because it was limited. Language is a giant, infinite ocean. Computers can easily drown in that sea. So, DARPA used semantic constraints instead. This was a brilliant tactical move then. They limited the computer's search field. If you say target, locked is likely. The machine ignores words like banana here. It only looks for relevant flight terms. This made the search much faster. It reduced the chance of a mistake. Language became a logical, finite map. Each word was a point on a graph. The computer followed the most logical path. This is how beam search actually works. It prunes away the dead branches instantly. If a path fails, it stops looking. This saved a lot of processing power. It turned a mess into a system. Think of it like a train track. The voice can only go certain ways. This made the 1976 breakthrough possible. Without constraints, the PDP-10 would crash. It would spend years thinking about By narrowing the focus, they won speed. It was a clever trick of logic. It felt like real, deep understanding. But it was just very smart math. Predictability was the key to true success. The machine knew what you would say. It was a step toward digital telepathy. Chapter 8: The Testing Grounds. The testing labs were cold and quiet. They were located in high-security buildings. Only men with top-secret clearance entered. The air smelled of ozone and coffee. Giant tape reels spun in the corner. Engineers wore white coats and thick glasses. They stared at green, glowing cathode screens. The pilots arrived in full flight gear. They looked out of place in labs. They sat in small, cramped wooden boxes. These boxes simulated a jet's tight cockpit. They wore heavy oxygen masks for realism. The masks muffled their voices quite a bit. This was the ultimate test for Harpy. The engineers held their breath in silence. One wrong word meant a failure. Millions of dollars were on the line. The pilot spoke into the dark mask. "Set radio to channel 7, he said. The room was silent for 3 seconds. Then, the computer screen flickered once. "Channel 7 set," the robot replied. The engineers jumped and cheered very loudly. They had cracked the code of speech. It worked in a high-stress environment. The data confirmed the total success here. The graph search had found the path. The machine had obeyed a human voice. This was a moment of pure history. The testers knew the world had changed. The cockpit was no longer a lonely place. Man had a partner made of light. Chapter 9, The First Success. The tension in the lab was thick. The pilot cleared his dry throat carefully. He spoke a very specific voice command. "Check fuel levels," he muttered softly. The computer's cooling fans hummed loudly. For a moment, nothing happened at all. Then, the green screen flickered to life. "Fuel level at 80%, it said. The voice was robotic and very flat. But the words were perfectly accurate. This was the first true success. A human spoke and a machine answered. It was a haunting and beautiful interaction. The barrier between man and tool vanished. Engineers felt a chill down their spines. They were witnessing the birth of AI. The cockpit was no longer a cage. It was now a responsive partner. This wasn't just a simple recording. The machine had processed the actual intent. It had navigated the complex Harpy graph. It found the meaning in the noise. The pilot smiled behind his heavy mask. He felt a new sense of power. He didn't need to move his hands. His voice was now a digital key. The potential was suddenly very clear. This would save many lives in combat. This would change how we build planes. The lab became a place of wonder. They ran the test again and again. Every time, the machine stayed focused. It was the first win for DARPA. The future of flight had finally arrived. Chapter 10, Why It Stayed Secret. The year 1976 was full of shadows. The Cold War was a silent war. Technology was a weapon of pure power. DARPA kept their success very hidden. They did not hold any press conferences. The public knew nothing of Harpy's victory. Military leaders feared the Soviet Union's spies. They wanted this advantage for themselves only. A silent cockpit was a strategic miracle. It allowed pilots to act much faster. Speed is the only king in dogfights. Information must flow like a river. If the enemy knew, they would copy. So, the documents were stamped top secret. They were locked in heavy steel safes. The researchers were told to stay quiet. No academic papers were published for years. This was the dark side of innovation. Great ideas often start in the dark. They grow in the silence of labs. We only see them much later on. The technology stayed in the military's hands. It evolved inside classified government projects. It became part of advanced radar systems. It helped guide missiles with voice cues. The world moved on to other things. But the ghost lived in the machine. The seeds of Siri were planted then. They were watered with deep military secrets. The silence was a tactical choice. It lasted for a very long time. Chapter 11, The Legacy of 1976. Look at your modern smartphone right now. Every voice assistant owes a huge debt. The algorithms of 1976 are still alive. They are the DNA of modern AI. We are living in DARPA's distant future. The Harpy System was the great ancestor. It taught us how to map language. It showed us how to ignore noise. Today, we take this for granted. We talk to our cars and houses. We ask our watches for the weather. But it all started in 1976. It started with pilots in a jet. Those engineers were the true pioneers. They didn't have the internet back then. They didn't have modern cloud computing power. They only had logic and hard work. They solved the hardest problems first. They paved the way for every developer. Voice tech is a bridge between worlds. It connects our thoughts to the silicon. This legacy is hidden but very vast. It changed how humans interact with tools. We no longer just use our hands. We use our most human gift. We use the power of speech. The 1976 project was a total success. It was the spark of a revolution. Its echo still rings in our ears. Chapter 12: Technical Limitations. The system was brilliant but not perfect. It required a very quiet room initially. Background noise still caused some major errors. It struggled with different regional accents. A Texan pilot might confuse the computer. A New York accent was a challenge. The vocabulary was limited to 1,000 words. You couldn't talk about your day. You could only talk about the mission. The PDP-10 computer was also very slow. It took time to process each sentence. It wasn't exactly instant like today's AI. The hardware was too big for jets. It stayed in the labs for years. Shrinking the chips was the next battle. They needed to move from cabinets to cards. This would take another decade of work. Power consumption was also a huge issue. These machines drank a lot of electricity. They generated a massive amount of heat. This was not ideal for a plane. But the foundation was rock solid now. The speech understanding era had finally arrived. The limitations were just temporary hurdles. They were goals for the next generation. Every failure taught a valuable lesson. The path forward was clearly marked. Science moves in small, steady steps. 1976 was a giant leap forward. Chapter 13: Closing the Circuit. Technology is a long, winding road. We traveled from cockpits to your home. We gave machines the gift of hearing. The silence of 1976 is now gone. We live in a world that listens. What will machines learn to do next? Will they understand our hidden emotions? Will they predict our very next thought? The story of DARPA is our story. It is the story of human curiosity. We always reach for the impossible stars. We turn complex noise into clear signal. Thank you for joining Synapse Daily. We hope you enjoyed this historical journey. Keep your own signal clear and strong. Until next time, stay curious and bold. The future is listening to you now.